Welcome to Getting to Know You. This is a program that Betty Osan started, germinated the idea, and felt that we're in a community that many people have done so many interesting things in their lives, and everybody has multiple stories of what those have been. And so we have been very privileged to have some people volunteer, be coerced, whatever you want to say, to share getting to know you. And Lou has a very, very interesting story, but I want to remind you all, there's a form downstairs that if you would be willing to share your time and your stories with us, please fill out the form, and when we schedule some more, I would love to be able to contact you. So Lou and I have a few conversations, and he has had an extremely interesting life, and he's been many, many things and places and doing, and he truly is an entrepreneur. And he started to be an entrepreneur really young, but I'll let him tell you those stories. So, Lou.
Well, you know, as a young kid, you try to do a lot of different things, you know, and at one point I thought I was going to be a policeman, and I had a little policeman's outfit, and even one day I got up in the middle of the street and stopped traffic, and I'm fortunate that somebody didn't run over me, you know, and so, you know, I collected stamps, and I collected college banners and did all that kind of stuff, and then a friend of mine, you know, we decided, well, gee, why don't we put out a little neighborhood newspaper? And we both lived on Magnolia Terrace in Springfield, Massachusetts. And so we had a contest of what are we going to call the paper. And his mother won the naming contest and came up with the name of the Terraced Trumpet. And we had a little saying that went with that, is the Terraced Trumpet, let her blow for all the news you don't know. And I think we charged like a nickel a copy, and so that was sort of what started, and my parents were very supportive of, you know, hey, this is great. And so I was the editor of my junior high paper, I was the sports editor of my high school paper and my college paper, and that got me my first job as a sports writer, and that's where I am today. And I've gone through various phases of corporate PR and advertising, and been writing for a jazz newspaper for about 35 years now, where I profile musicians from all over the country and do a column and so forth, and it just kind of keeps my hand. And I really enjoy it. It's a challenge, you know, because you start with a blank piece of paper and you try to come up with something that's interesting, and if you don't come up with a good lead sentence, you've got problems because people aren't going to read the article. So Lou, that's how I got going.
Well, actually, that little boy has been directing traffic for a long time. He was the little police officer, but there are many companies and organizations and people. You've been directing traffic for a long, long time. Would you agree?
I haven't had anybody put it quite that way, but I guess I got to plead guilty and so forth. But in other words, you know, if I get involved in an organization, I feel, you know, if I can help to make it better and to accomplish its purpose, I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, I'm not interested in just having my name on a letterhead and so forth. And so, I mean, that's led to some pretty interesting experiences for me. So, I mean, I kind of started, as I said, and one of my first jobs was a sports information director at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and I see they're going to change the name of the state, and the legal name is the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, and because of all of the nonsense that's going on now, it's now going to be just the state of Rhode Island. So anyway, that's a little diversion, as it were. But anyway, it was interesting because I'd always been interested in sports, and my dad was a semi-pro baseball player. And so he kind of indoctrinated my brother and I and so forth, and we used to have to fight over the sports section every morning. And I would say I was an enthusiastic athlete, but I wasn't very good. So, you know, how do you stay involved? Well, you be a sports writer. That's the way it started. So when I got out of college, I had a couple of offers. One was to stay at Brown and do sports information, and the other was to work for the Providence Journal and be the assistant, the #2 beat writer, covering the Boston Red Sox and the Boston Braves. We had two pro teams in Boston then, and I guess out of my loyalty to Brown, I took that job. And I sort of wondered, you know, what would have been like if I had continued my career as a sports writer, you know, and covering them in major leagues. And certainly with the situation as it is now, you know, with all the turmoil, I probably made the right decision. But anyway, you know, met some pretty interesting people there, and it was, the coach of our football team was a guy named Rip Engel, and our backfield coach was a guy by the name of Weeb Eubank, who was the coach of the Baltimore Colts when they won the Super Bowl. And our quarterback was a kid from Brooklyn, New York, called Joe Paterno. So in a sense, I can maybe claim I was Joe Paterno's first PR man. And it was interesting because Joe was going to go to law school, and Rip said, you know, he got the Penn State job, and he wanted Joe to go with him because he knew the system. And Joe, and he had really had talked Joe into it, and Rip said, well, why don't you go for a year, come with me for a year, and then you can go to law school. Well, you know the history there, because Joe became one of the great college football coaches of all time. So it sort of took off from there. And then I got into corporate PR, and in a sense started the public relations department with the Masters Mutual Life Insurance Company. Actually, I started in advertising, and they were just getting into national advertising, and we had a campaign that was that featured illustrations by Norman Rockwell. And so anyway, that led to PR, and then I decided the corporate thing really wasn't my thing. And so I started my own advertising agency and did that for about 12 years, and then I had a year as an editor of a local newspaper, which kind of converted it from being a shopper to a community newspaper. That was an interesting experience, and that led me into the nonprofit field. And I did some time with a tourism and economic development organization in Western Massachusetts, and then came out here and went through a couple of things, and eventually ended up as the executive director of the Valley of the Sun chapter of the National Football Foundation and College Hall of Fame. You know, every sport has a Hall of Fame. And we had 128 chapters across the country, and we were the Arizona chapter, and that, you know, got me acquainted with Frank Kush, who was one of the great characters that I've ever met in my lifetime. And then at the same time, I got involved with the Arizona Classic Jazz Society. Really kind of was one of the co-founders, and did that for about 12 years.
And Lou, let me slow you up, because I'd like to toot your horn, because you've also had some amazing awards that you're just sort of glossing over. And you were also the recipient of the Foundation's Outstanding Chapter Leadership Award in 1996. And just recently, in 2014, you got the Distinguished Arizona Award. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's great honors.
Yes, and I want to toot another horn, because you also were named Outstanding Young Man of the Year in 1958 by the Massachusetts Jaycees.
Yeah, I was quite active in the Junior Chamber of Commerce, which I thought was a great experience of learning how to, you know, run a business, and it gave you sort of, we used to say it gave you a chance to make mistakes, and they weren't fatal. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you were working for the company, a company, and you did something wrong, you could be out the door. But in Jaycees, you know, we got into a lot of community projects and so forth. And when I got that, it was really kind of amazing, because about 4 years before, that award went to President John Kennedy, because it wasn't president then, but so they've been some pretty distinguished people. And I think, you know, I just sort of feel that a lot of these people that I've met along the way, they've kind of been models. Mm-hmm. And it's not a matter of saying, you know, hey, I know this person, I know that person kind of thing, but, you know, just, fortunately, some of them have been mentors to me, and that's great. I mean, everybody needs a mentor along the way, and I think about, you know, what I knew then and what I know now. It's like, you know, night and day, you know, and so I can say, you know, I've had some successes and I've had some situations where I felt I didn't do as well as I could have done and so forth, but it's been a kind of an interesting life.
I think so,
I wouldn't
too.
change it really.
And also, when you were running a public relations department, you had some very not well-known accounts, right?
Well,
Like
you know,
Hershey's, Blue Cross, Philip Morris, Westinghouse. We gotta get you tooting your horn.
Well, you know, running an advertising agency it's really an interesting experience because, you know, you get involved in a lot of different forms. I mean, in situations and products and services. I mean, we did banks, we did prep schools, we did hospitals, you know, and each is very unique under its own way. And, you know, when Westinghouse, what they were making were vending machines. And all I ever knew about a vending machine is you put a dime in or a quarter or whatever it is now, and you get a can of Coke or Pepsi or whatever, you know. So we had to learn all the intricacies of how a vending machine works. And so we did, you know, a lot of promotional stuff, a lot of marketing things for them. And, you know, it really, it's an interesting experience, you know. I think, you know, you go in with a perception of what that company is all about, and you find it's not that way. And so, and hopefully you can make a contribution along the way.
Uh-huh. What were your Navy days like?
Well, you know, it was, I got out of high school in 1943, and you know, we were right in the middle of the war, and, you know, everybody at my age, you know, couldn't wait to get in the service. And the Navy had a program called V-12. It was an officer training program. And so I figured I'd rather be on a ship in the ocean than, you know, in a foxhole. So I signed up. I took the test and passed it and so forth. And got sent to Williams College in Western Massachusetts, grade school. And it was sort of an engineering course, which is not my cup of tea, and how I survived it, I have no idea. But one course I was able to take was a course in naval history, which was taught by the president of the college, James Finney Baxter, who was a noted naval historian. And that was a great course, and I really enjoyed that. And then from there, that was a 2 years deal, and then went to New York, to Columbia, to midshipman school, and got, at the age of about 18, I guess I must have been at that point, probably was one of the youngest officers in the Navy, got a commission as an ensign. And so I had a good friend that said, you know, you're going to be assigned to the Advanced Officers Training School in Miami, Florida. I said, okay. He said, you better get a set of whites. You know, I mean, the Navy officers had a complete white outfit. And so I did, and my orders came through, and it was for the ADCOM FIBSPAC, which, to explain it, is the commander of the amphibious forces in the Pacific. So I never wore those whites, and took the train across the country and waited for ship and got taken to Pearl Harbor and picked up an LST, which is a landing ship tank, and we took off from there, and I was the navigator of the ship. And in those days, we didn't have all the technology we have today, you know, and a lot of it depended on me shooting the sun or shooting the stars to determine where we were. And, you know, for an 18-year-old kid and you're responsible for a couple of hundred people, it's quite a responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so we went up, we were in the invasion of Okinawa, and then we kicked around a little bit in different islands and so forth. And then we were in the Philippines, and we were going to be in the first wave to invade Japan if they had. And fortunately, from our perspective, they dropped the A-bomb, and it didn't happen. So then we did go to Japan, and then I went over to China, and that's when we decommissioned the ship, and eventually got shipped back home and finished my college, and then took off from there.
I want to know, on Veterans Day, do you get to wear your white uniform?
Oh, that's long gone. I have no idea where that is. You know, that's. that's ancient history.
So you never got to use it?
Never,
Uh-huh.
yeah. No.
And what about in your as a private citizen, did you like boats?
Well, what do you mean by that?
I don't know. You were driving a pretty big one at one point.
Well, you know, it's really, I guess, it's a collection of a lot of different stories, a lot of different situations, and you know, there's a fellow named Harvey Mackay that's written a lot of books, like, you know, how to survive, and you know, what do you do when you get fired, and don't, you know, beware the naked man that offers you his coat and that sort of stuff. So I've heard him speak a couple times. He's an excellent speaker, and you know, motivation and all that kind of stuff. And he said, you know, the average person going in the job market today is going to have 12 different jobs, and it's basically 3 career changes. And it's, my life has sort of followed that pattern, not always by design and so forth. But so, you know, I just I get to a point where I sort of, you know, I want to do something different. I mean, I don't want to say I get bored, but I guess that's what motivates me to say, hey, what's next down the road, you know? And,
I'd call that curiosity.
well, yeah, you know, it's I like to learn things. I mean, I think, you know, when you graduate from college, the occasion is called the commencement. And to me, that's the commencement of your education.
And you've been educated by many people and the educator of many people.
Yeah, I've taught, which is a very interesting experience. Usually it was night school, you know, I taught creative writing and problem solving and things like that, and, you know, always was one chapter ahead of the students. But it's great, you know. I mean, it's the same with coaching, you know. I coached quite a bit in baseball, hockey, and you know, having played the game is one thing, and having teach it to young people is something totally different. So, you know, these are all challenges. It's like writing a story, you know. I start with a blank piece of paper. And where do you go from there? And if I don't write an interesting lead sentence, you're not going to read the story. So that's what makes it interesting and challenging, you know, to find something that is unusual. You know, my second book just came out, and I sent it to a copy of the gentleman who's the manager of the 4 Freshmen, and he said, I really enjoyed it because a lot of people I knew, and we've had them in our festivals over in California and so forth. And he said, particularly, you know, you brought up a lot of things about some of these people that you don't normally see in the normal biography, you know, and so I've come up with a lot of interesting stories in that regard, you know, and so what got me into book publishing is that this gentleman here, Ed Polzer, he has become a good friend of mine. He went to Princeton, and while he was at Princeton, he got into a Dixieland band, and they were invited to Princess Grace's wedding reception over in Monaco. So, you know, he did that, and then he did a lot of other things. So we got to be good friends, and so I've been writing all these profiles, and he said, you know, you're a good writer, you ought to put them in a book. And I said, no, I'm a repertorial writer, you know, I mean, you write a story, you hand it in, okay, what's the next assignment? And so he talked me into this. So in 2013, I wrote, you know, jazz beat notes on classic jazz, and this is it on the cover. There's 47 profiles in there, including this Bill Keane in there, and Bob Ehrlich, who's the guy who started the Musical Instrument Museum. And so I did that, and then when we came out here, you know, and moved into Westminster, I realized, you know, I'd written about 50 more since 2013. So I mean, maybe put them in another book, you know, because I feel that, you know, there's some historical value to this. I mean, I'm not looking to build a big career out of it, but there are not a lot of the people that are writing about these people. And so I wanted particularly to have a young female musician on the cover, and this is Bria Schoenberg, who originally came from Chilliwack, British Columbia, and is now in New York and is very successful. She's a trumpet player, obviously, but I wanted to have her as a model for all of the young talented musicians today, because a lot of people think about our kind of music as old folks, you know, because this is what we were listening to in the 40s and the 50s, you know. And so that's what she's all about, and so this is Jazz Beat Encore, and so far everybody seems to like it, so I don't think I'm gonna write any more books, though. This one took me about 11 months to do, and that one took me 9 months, and that is even considering the fact that the writing had basically been done, but it was all the editing and the formatting and finding pictures and working, you know. This is a deal with Amazon where they will print your book if you send them the file, and that's a key, as an ebook and a paperback. And so they're going to do all the marketing for me, all the fulfillment, which is, I don't want to do that because I did it for the first book, and it really gets to be a drag after a while.
Am I to assume that you have worked with a fair amount of women? Because putting that female on a book cover
Oh,
is
yeah.
also
Yes.
cutting edge. As far as jazz and female jazz players.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you know, I judge people on, you know, what do you bring to the table?
Who are
you
the
know?
human beings, huh?
Yeah, you know, and you know, everybody's got a talent. It's just a matter, can you bring it out of them, or can, you know, is it apparent and so forth. So that's always been my philosophy. And, you know, I enjoy people. It's always, you know, how do you reach that person? And a lot of times, you know, when you have somebody that has a counter opinion or approach than what you do, you know, how do you find that middle ground? And how do you resolve it? And how do you actually make things happen? I mean, to me, that's the key, you know. And the bottom line is, did you get the job done?
And if I remember, there were a fair number of women in your life. Daughters?
Yeah, my mother was, my parents were both very supportive, and they were great, you know. And my mother was she should have ran the show. And so I think a lot of my, you know, aggressiveness, if there is such a thing, and dealing with people, I learned from her. My dad was a very even-tempered guy, you know, and everybody liked him, and so forth, and just, you know, I really am so thankful that you know, they were my parents and so forth, and the people that I met along the way, you know. I mean, it's just, and of course, when I went to work for Mass Mutual, they bonded you, you know, so you didn't walk off with the place. And so one day, this good-looking blonde shows up to bond me. And so 69 years ago, we
You bonded.
we bonded for sure. You really got carried away on that situation, but it's been great, and she's terrific, and is my, you know, very best friend, and you know, the fact that we have been quarantined for 101 days, you know, you'd think you'd be at each other's throat, but we're good company, and we enjoy it, and it's not something you particularly, you know, volunteer to do, but these are unusual times, so you say, hey, okay, I'll toe the line, and you know, we'll get through this, you know. So that's the way it's been, you know, and we had 3 kids, but unfortunately we lost 2 of them, and you know, that's a very traumatic experience for parents, you know, and but unfortunately our son has been he's a history teacher in private schools on the East Coast. He's in Delaware now in a school that was started by the DuPonts. And we have 3 great-grandkids, and Chuck, who's been here, is a country singer. He's in Texas, and that's what he wants to do, you know. I don't think he's ever gonna make $1 million, but he wants to be in Texas, and he wants to compose songs and perform and all that kind of stuff, and he's a happy kid right now. And our granddaughter, Carrie, she's working for Coach, so she's in the high fashion field, and it's just been doing it a couple of years now, and really hasn't had a chance, and particularly since they've all been told to work out of home, at home, and so on and so forth. So, and Bill, our youngest, is just graduated from Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania. He was a rugby player. He's 6'4", and he's taking some exams to be a financial advisor now. So, you know, it's great to follow them and just, you know, just see how they progress and so forth, and, you know, say that I feel our son and his wife have done a great job of raising their kids, just as I say my parents did a great job of raising myself and my brother.
And your wife and you did a great
And
job.
yeah, so it's great. It's
Sounds like a pattern.
well, you know, it's you know, we're so happy to be here at Westminster. It's you were at the right place at the right time and made the right decision for sure.
And again, I'd like to toot your horn in that one of the things you have given our community here is the jazz group. And my husband and I love jazz, and we have so appreciated the programs that you've put together, because they've been amazing.
Well, that's where I've been fortunate, in you know, in the years that I've been involved and traveled around the country, I've got to know these people. So I, you know, and fortunately have been able to get people like Adrian Cunningham and the Addison Twins and Rosanna Sportiello, you know, to knowing what their schedule was and so forth, that it made it possible for them to come to Westminster and to present, you know, the very best in this music at, you know, at this time. So it's great. But to me, the satisfaction is, you know, we had over 100 people that sign up as patrons. So it's had a real impact, and it's, so I mean, I'm happy to do it. I kind of said when I came in, I mean, this is the kind of thing I've been doing all my life. You know, I've been running 60 miles an hour for 50 years. I'm not going to do it well. Famous last words, but I enjoy it, and it's just, it's, you know, it's a satisfying thing.
You still haven't taken off your jogging shoes.
And for now, I guess, you know, it's tough to teach an old dog new tricks.
Well, we certainly did enjoy Nicole Pinsky's last concert.
Yeah.
And that piano was interesting, because with the mirrors on it, or what was there, you could really see her fingers just going.
Yeah, that's
And
great
they're
that when you can, with this technology today, you know, that you can actually see somebody like a
Yes.
very talented piano player. I mean,
Oh.
she is an amazing lady, and I'm scheduled to give a talk in, I don't know, September, I guess, about jazz per se. I mean, not about me, but jazz. And a little bit of history, because, I mean, that's one of the things that attracted me, that there's so much great history connected with the music and so forth. And of course, this is what we grew up listening to, you know, with the big bands, and of course, people say, hey, how come you're not a musician, you know? And I said, yeah, I can't even sing. And yet, you know, you're writing about jazz. Well, it just, you know, again, it's the attraction of the music, the attraction of the people. And, you know, Nicole, I'm told, is somebody that can hear a tune and then play it back immediately. So that is amazing. And you watch, you know, the hands and so forth, and you know, how do they know which keys to hit? And so I haven't figured that one out yet, but I enjoy it, you know,
But
go ahead. Rosanna's been a very good friend of ours, you know, and he, you know, we've got good friends. And one of the things that happened when we were cleaning our old house to move over here, I ran across a couple of autographs that I didn't know I had. One was of Fats Waller, and the other was of Fats Waller and somebody else. And so I gave them to Rosanna, and he just, you know, he thought it's like I just, you know, blessed him with his firstborn kind of stuff. And it's interesting. So I'll think of who the other guy is in a minute.
Well, any good performance.
Teddy Wilson, you know,
Wilson.
who's a wonderful, wonderful piano player. It's, I think I'm very partial to piano players, and Teddy Wilson was kind of my first, idol, and then I hooked up with a guy named Eddie Higgins, who was prominent in Chicago, and now it's been Rosanno and Nicole. They're just so great.
Well, any good performers, whether they're athletes or musicians or whatever, they also appreciate a good audience.
Yeah,
And so being knowledgeable and observant and recording,
yeah,
That's
it's
that's an important part for a performer.
yeah. I've just gotten involved with the Zoom, so
Uh-huh.
that's to me. I mean, these are things that interest me. I mean, it's a new experience. I mean, I don't know. You got to figure it out, and how does it work, and so forth. So it's where we're at right now,
Mhm.
and trying to keep everything running.
Mm-hmm. And you're also good at bringing the best out in people.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's. I think that comes from coaching. I mean, how do you? It's a combination of coaching and teaching,
Uh-huh.
and so. As I said before, to have played a sport or have taken a course is one thing, but be able to communicate it and teach it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a writer, yes, but I'm a communicator, and I'm a storyteller. I love to tell stories. I mean, it drives my wife crazy because, she's heard them all. But I said, hey, that's the way it was. These things I can't make these up.
Uh-huh. That's right. And you've got many, many good stories to tell.
Yeah, yeah.
You also have a very impressive, from my point of view, your alma mater is impressive. Both Brown and Columbia and Williams, I mean, you had
Yeah.
good roots there.
Yeah, as I said, I look at the commencement as a start of your education,
Mhm.
and so I'm always looking to learn something. I love history, and so I'm saddened by a lot of what I'm seeing, because I think what's happening is that we're judging history by today's standards, and I'm not sure that's appropriate. So, I enjoy going. They have these one-day universities that come into town, and they have 3 professors usually that talk about whatever their area of expertise is, and it's fascinating. I mean, I'm not a fine arts guy, but we had somebody from the Metropolitan Art Museum talk, and it was a fascinating talk to understand what this particular portrait was all about, and to have, people that really are, knowledgeable in their particular field, share that with you and so forth, and to me that's exciting, I just, it's a matter of, I like to learn something and to feel I've accomplished something. I mean, that's sort of what motivates me, what gets me out of bed in the morning, and so forth. So it's the way it is.
And when you think of those universities, have you done any of their elder hostels or travel groups?
No, I haven't. Well, I guess, the answer is no, I haven't.
No?
It's just, I've had enough similar opportunities in various areas, so that one of the courses I taught was problem solving, and at that time there was a gentleman by the name of Alex Osborne who had written a book about applied imagination and brainstorming. And that was part of what I thought that was great, that in terms of how do you solve problems, and the difficulty, oftentimes when you sit down with somebody and try to solve a problem, everybody's got their own opinion, and, you come to loggerheads, and so at some point you've got to, we got to find a way to find a solution, if that's what we're doing, And brainstorming is, you sit around and everybody throws out their ideas and you put them on a board and so forth. You don't evaluate them, you know.
That's
And then
right.
you go back and you begin to evaluate them and cull them down to find something that's gonna work and be successful. And everybody is reasonably happy with, you
Right.
know, so that's always been my approach to things, you know, that, you know, I ran a 132 team hockey, junior hockey league. You know, it's crazy. What are you doing? You know, I was trying to run a business and doing this and so forth, and you know, and it's tough to deal with parents. And when I coached, I said to the parents, look, I'm volunteering here. I'm not getting paid for this, and we're going to do it my way. And I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you if you've got a suggestion or whatever, but you're not going to tell me how to run the thing.
You mean the coach didn't want to be coached?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, no, I mean, I think you have to keep an open mind, you know,
Uh-huh.
but, you know, you hear too many stories that it's the parents that are killing youth sports.
Yes, yes.
And I didn't want to get involved in that situation, and the kids ought to have a good time.
Mhm.
And, you know, one of the things we did is every kid had got a nickname, and we had a lot of fun doing that, you know, so that, I don't know, I forgot why it was, my son was Moose. There was something happened that, you know, that was an appropriate name, so that was Moose, you know.
Well, he was big.
And so, you know, they enjoyed it, and I would plan my sessions and hope that they would understand, you know, how do you understand, you know, that they hadn't really dealt with signals and that kind of stuff, and then a little of the strategy of the game, and so you try to impute a little bit of that with them, you know, so that they can grow, and it's a progressive thing, you know, and you know, very few of these kids are going to be, you know, outstanding athletes, but it ought to be a fun thing, you know, and something they can continue to do for at least some period of time. I mean, you're not going to play football all your life, but you are going to play golf, and you are going to play tennis, and so forth, and that's important that, you know, you do that, so you try to get them headed in the right and understand what it's all about and how to accept defeat. You know, that's a lesson unto itself. I always had problems with that, you know, because I was a very intense athlete and you know, I wanted to do everything I could to win, but I didn't have the talent always to make it happen. So, you know, but it's like my association with Frank Kush. You know, he was known as a very difficult, very tough coach. When I got to know him, he had mellowed considerably, you know, but he really cared about the players. And I don't know how many players that I met individuals who had played with him that said, when I played with you, I hated you, but you turned my life around. So that's the value of athletics, among other things, you know. I mean, it teaches you to be competitive. It teaches you, well, there are a lot of lessons you can use, which, unfortunately, a lot of these academicians don't understand, don't appreciate, you know. And it's part of the educational process. I mean, there are some schools that go overboard, you know, and the kids are there to be athletes, but hopefully some of them are getting educations along the way. I think it's important.
Well, I'm not a competitive person, and it was important to me that our children appreciated, you know, that it would be okay for them to lose as well as win, etc. And my mother, who is quite a competitive person, was visiting when our son was doing, it was like whatever the day when you do running and blocking on what that was called.
Track?
Well, yeah, track day. And anyway, my mother is saying goodnight to our son, because she's staying at her house, and she said, I certainly hope you win. And our son said, Grandma, it doesn't make any difference whether you win or lose. It's how much you enjoy the game.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, yes, I really made it with him.
Well, it's a great learning experience. I mean, even when you lose, you need to look at the experience and say, okay, what should I do different?
Yes.
And that's the way you improve.
And who was the coach that was not critical, but always empowered the players? I don't know who that coach was,
Well,
but he was well known too, wasn't
There's
he?
a lot of them that would fall into that category.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, they come in all shapes and sizes. So,
Uh-huh. So a good coach
Anyway.
doesn't have to be a harsh critic.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, because the Football Foundation has its annual banquet in December, and it's for years and years and years. It was at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, and that's where they induct the next class of Hall of Famers. And so when we were trying to get Frank in, it took 7 years for us to get him on, you know, 1995. And so I used to take him to New York so people get to know him and say he's not a bad guy.
Uh-huh.
And but Frank knew everybody, and he was so great in introducing you to all of the great coaches and all the great players. And for a kid, you know, from a small town, you know, it's like being a kid being in a candy store, you know.
Uh-huh.
That you know, to say, hey, I met Bear Bryant, I met, you know, you name it, and so forth, and so forth. So that's you know, that's the kick we get in terms of you know, people you watch on television and so forth, that to have a chance to get up close to them and just see what they're all about, you know, and that's what I find very interesting.
Well, Lou, I hope you never decide to take off your jogging shoes, and that you also continue to direct traffic safely.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
My doctor tells me I'm going to live to be 100, and I said, okay, you're invited to the party. And so I got about 6 more years to play around with that deal, and so far so good. It's gone great, and we just knock on wood and
Well,
hope for the best. But it's been fun. It's a wonderful experience, and we are super happy to be here at Westminster.
and we really appreciate your contribution today. Thank you very, very much.